Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ad Age Remotely. I'm Janine Poggi, editor of Ad Age. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I'm joined by Bing Chen, co founder and president of Gold House, a nonprofit collective of AAPI leaders. Bing, who's been credited as one of the founders of influencer marketing during his time at YouTube, is also being honored next month by the American Advertising Federation as part of their 2022 class of the Advertising Hall of Achievement. Hi, Bing.
Hey, Janine, good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, for those of you watching at home, if you like what we're doing here on Ad Age Remotely, please like, subscribe, share, or retweet this post. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them on our social channels, and we will try to get to them during this conversation. Bing, congrats on being named to the Advertising Hall of Achievement, as well as receiving AAF's Jack Averett Volunteer Spirit Award.
Thank you, Janine. It's very imposterous given I don't actually work in advertising traditionally, but it's just an honor to be here.
And the Hall of Achievement, for those of you who don't know, honors people under the age of 40 who are leading the industry into the future. I'm curious what advice you would give to those early in their career, climbing up the ladder, about how they can make an impact.
I would say the first step and the most essential one is to figure out what form of impact you most care about. And as soon as you find out why you are here, what that impact is, you should try to get there, of course, as quickly as possible. Now, of course, that sounds like a privileged thing to say because not all of us can, let's say, drop our jobs and just go to a new thing, especially given the downturn. But I would say that's the most essential. I'd say the second, and I feel like Gen Z, especially and younger millennials, are better at this than perhaps I was or we were. But I think is focusing on being quite distinct as opposed to just being derivative or replicative of a traditional path is also really critical. No one has, of course, sort of the same path as anyone else. And then the third thing I would say is if you mess up, as Marianne Evans once said, it's never too late to be who you might have been. And so if you have sort of a quarter life crisis, a midlife crisis or whatever, it's not really about the crisis, of course. It's more so about how that transitions into something else that is, more endemic to what you actually want.
You mentioned starting out early. You, of course, got your start very early at YouTube, but then made the transition into founding Gold House. Like, how did that come about? Why did you decide to sort of leave that world of digital marketing, the creator economy, in which you were like really at the forefront of, to go and start Gold House?
It was three impetuses. So my dream since I was a boy was to be the next Walt Disney, but existential. So how do we incubate and invest in both stories as well as systems that just reshape dreams for people at a very practical
I
level?
need to stop you right there. What is a Walt Disney, but existential? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so life and death. And by the way, I should, for the record, I adore Disney. So this is in no way to belittle, a company that's worth $170 billion more than I am. But no, I think the difference is I won't invest in, just something that is like fictitious. We have to invest in real people because I think as a human being, we have an imperative to find miracles where we are and to recognize that not everyone has the ability to just escape their lives. We actually need to fix their lives where we are. And so the films, the stories, the studios that we invest in are all life and death, particularly for marginalized groups. And then on the system side or the business side, as much as I love Star Wars, a lightsaber doesn't serve any utility, right? Or if it does, it probably is a quite violent one that shouldn't be, shouldn't exist. And so instead, we invest in different programs and or products that elongate, let's say, health or longevity, those that actually help with mental health, for instance, so forth and so on.
Yeah, you started Gold House in 2018. Obviously, the socioeconomic climate has certainly evolved and changed since then. How has the organization changed along, even with the rise in hate crimes against the community? How has that influenced the priorities on your end?
Yeah, absolutely. I also realized, Janine, I didn't actually answer your last question, but Gold House is a part of the Disney plan. Was got that one. No, I think as with all things, there's sort of this undulative negotiation between inductive need and then deductive need. So the big obvious inductive need for Gold House was partly because of Trump and COVID and misperceptions, I should say, about COVID. There was this sort of rampant xenophobia against our community that unfortunately continues with record high attacks. Obviously, when you see your own or really any human being who's innocent get attacked, you as a good person have a visceral sort of negative response to that. At a deductive level, though, is I don't just want to sort of operate from a place of affliction. as important as that may be, we also have to operate from a place of affirmation. And so what I mean by that is we can't just sort of take the hand or system that has been given us and assume that we have to correct it. We actually should instead articulate what should be right in the first place, not just trying to fix what's broken. And so when you look deductively at our community, we're the fastest growing immigrant population, will be the second largest minority group within the next 2 decades. We are a majority of the world. Most multinational companies that operate globally, a disproportionate majority of their growth is of course coming from Asia, so forth and so on. So you just have a lot of sort of affirming sort of economic opportunity that hasn't been honed. And so that those two sort of insights inform Gold House, of course. I'm the baby of Gold House, so far beyond me to tell all these leaders what to do. But we met with basically 300 people and asked them, given these two sort of unresolved negotiations we're stuck in between, what would you do if you were to help our diaspora? And everyone, of course, said the same 3 to 4 things. One is none of us support each other, which is why we've rallied the largest single API leadership network where we deploy those formidable resources against essential causes. One of our proudest moments is alongside CMO of GoFundMe, Musa Tariq, designer Philip Lim, Rebecca Ma, and others, Victor Nguyen Long, who are sort of titans in marketing and advertising as well. We created what is still the single largest Stop Asian Hate fundraiser to date, both for victims as well as local grassroots orgs. The second is people didn't like how we were being portrayed in media. Women were being overly fetishized. Men were being emasculated, asterisk, whatever emasculation even means in 2022. And so now we collaborate with every major media company on everything from cultural consultation to product placement to pipeline investments to marketing successful projects. Parasite is one of our sort of je ne sais quoi. We are the dominant marketing reason why Parasite was the best performing film opening weekend by per theater average before the pandemic. And then third is business. We are gainfully employed, but the least likely demographic to be promoted to management, according to Harvard Business Review. And a recent report in McKinsey indicated that Asian women are actually the least, especially in boards as well. And so to that end, instead of just trying to cultivate existing sort of leaders in existing companies, because there's candidly a lot of great orgs doing that, we want to operate from a place of affirmation where we instead are just going to found our own companies. And so to that end, we have the largest top API founder network, the nation's leading founder accelerator for APIs. The companies have actually collectively raised over $500 million in follow-on capital since its inception 3 years ago. So wildly successful by any calibration. And then we also have the Definitive API Fund. And we think by investing resources, capital, time, and so forth into our own companies, we can sort of reshape what C-suites look like, reshape what board directors look like. So that's where Gold House has sort of been to date. Now, where do we sort of go from here? Because I think people think that we're sort of building a Stop Asian Hate activist org, and that's really not what we're up to. As essential as I think that is for many communities. Gold House's whole purpose was how do we hone the world's largest minority, which of course is 4.5 billion people across the continent of Asia and the rest of the world. And how do we deploy our formidable resources to ensure that we're reshaping the world in a way that's inclusive and impactful for everybody? So phase 2, we actually just started secretly. It's called Gold Bridge because we're annoying. And the whole idea is, again, how do we harness that power and deploy it? So there are 3 elements there. One is how do we just cross-pollinate industries to invent new ones? So how do we enable creatives, for instance, in our media work to actually invest in the next great companies? I always think about what 50 Cent and Vitamin Water did, right? With actually an Indian marketer. Or shepherded, I should say, by an Indian marketer. And then, of course, vice versa. Second is how do we enable cross-cultural, not even allyship, but sustainable and sincere investments in distributions in our companies? And you're about to see something formidable there that we'll announce at Adweek. And then third is cross-continentally. How are we going to build that Pacific bridge where we're going to help anyone's creative and company successfully navigate between the 2 supercontinents that are dictating a disproportionate amount of global growth, which of course are North America and Asia.
So how are you evaluating what you're investing in? Like how you're prioritizing the companies and agendas that are most important right now?
This is the $1 trillion question, isn't it? So the first piece is I am smart enough to know that I don't know most things. And I think the greatest thing I learned from YouTube was that if you create a space for people to think, they will often think better than you can. And so to that end, we have legions and legions of expert panels that basically decide what we invest in across the board, whether it's a new creative project for marketing or it's actually a new company. The second insight here is DNIB is not a charity. I know Gold House is a 501c3, but we did that to be pure. Candidly, had anyone else, I think, created Gold House, it would be worth billions of dollars, raised 9 figures of capital and all of the things. But even though we are a charity, this is not a charity. we have to sort of perpetuate the highest quality founders and creatives, because if we don't, it actually sends our community, unfortunately, back in many ways. Now, there are other organizations, I think, that are better suited than us to be even more inclusive. But we do care about quality quite a bit, because we know it's at stake. And we also know that within quality, we have a longer term ability to employ even more opportunities, people, and so forth. So I think that's the second that goes in. The third, of course, is we try our best to not only ensure that our output products, so the companies that we're investing in, that they have regenerative processes, but also that their internal teams are inclusive, and not only in hiring, but also in elevation. So it's a sort of constant struggle between sort of all these three different avenues. But yeah, we do our best.
Looking specifically at the advertising landscape, what do you see as the state of AAPI representation in, brand marketing?
So yeah, I should probably name check a lot of people who have better answers on this than I do. The Helen Lins of Publicis, the Susie Nonzo Droga Phi, the Judy Johns of Edelman, the Bill Manas of IW, Mats Masada Dentsus, and the Elliott Lums. So they will definitely have the better guidance on this since they operate day to day. But I'd say it probably begins first with the mental shift. There's a sort of misperception in multicultural marketing that minorities only consume minority stuff. Said another way, that only Asians consume Asian creative. And that's just not the case. When you look at the highest forms of art, whether it's the most watched TV show or series on Netflix, it's of course Squid Games entirely in Korean. When you look at A24, which is my favorite independent studio in the world, when you look at their most lucrative film in history, it's Everything Everywhere All at Once, led by an Asian woman over the age of 50. And so I think that's the first sort of mental shift. The second mental shift that is endemic to all creative is there are really only two ways that newness is created. And because we're all sort of like squirrels chasing a nut, newness matters. The first is hybridization of two traditionally disparate sensibilities. This is, of course, is how we engineered the creator economy. It was basically sort of I don't want to say B tier, but a lot of the non-traditional Hollywood folks or creative folks, plus scale technology, plus advertising, that really created that economy, right? So hybridization there. The second way is by giving a spotlight to groups and or sensibilities that are traditionally invisible. And of course, minorities are probably the most obvious ones to go after. So anyway, so I think those mental shifts have to begin first. I think the second piece is we can't just look at absolute numbers. If you look at the API diaspora, we're only 7.5%. But when we actually look at how we consume, we punch well above our weight. We're the second most frequent moviegoers in theatrical. We outconsume many other demographics on online shopping, so forth and so on. And so I think that's the second that hopefully advertising is waking up to. Third is also the intersectionality, not just within, but also I think across our communities. A disproportionate percentage of mixed race births, whose growth rate is now outpacing non-mixed race births, are coming from South America as well as Asia because of immigration rates. And so looking at sort of that nexus, I think, is really important, not just in who someone is biologically, but how we can learn from one community and another, because we do have concentricities. Exhibit A, 75% of us from those two continents grow up in a bilingual household, right? There's a lot of consistencies in terms of marketing tactics that we can employ. And then I think the final thing is, like, there's always, of course, all the basics. Like, we have to hire who we are speaking to. If we can't hire full-time who we are speaking to and promote them, we need to hire consultants or partners, right? So there's I think a lot of elements there.
Yeah. I want to switch gears a bit and talk about the early part of your career when you were the head of creator content at YouTube. Obviously, the creator economy, the influencer marketing landscape has exploded from when you were in that role. I'm curious, has your vision for what an influencer was back, a decade or more ago, is it holding up to what you initially thought it would look like in the early days of your career?
I think the smart answer to this is we always end up hating the thing we created. And I can give you a gazillion examples, like Exhibit A, when we globalized the partner program, or when I led the globalization of the partner program in 2011 from 9 to 42 countries. We knew it was going to depreciate a lot of the display advertising market. I'll probably get in trouble from YouTube for saying that now, but it didn't stratify it in terms of pricing and so forth. And that, of course, is indeed what has happened. We also realized that while it's a beautiful sort of log line to say that all opportunities should be democratized, the reality is not everyone deserves an equal opportunity, because not everyone is equally talented, which is an unpopular opinion, but real. And so how do you stratify services and so forth? So I see that's probably my visceral response. That being said, like where is the influencer, rather creator economy going now? I think one is creators are more important than ever because of a continuously growing aversion to traditional institutions. I think within the creator economy, we're looking increasingly for more high quality, more expert and micro influencers. Said another way, sort of the big whales are candidly, a lot of them are overpriced. They struggle from too many dormant followers, so forth and so on. And increasingly, because there is an overabundance of them in the past, let's say 12 years or so, really 15 if you count starting 2006 with the creation of YouTube. There's just too many. And so the natural sort of industry cyclical response is, well, who is the best among them? Two forms of best right now are, of course, experts. So you see, of course, the rapid rise of the utility experts, whether it's fitness gurus or fashion gurus or geek culture gurus. On the micro side, this is also really important, of course, because they aren't prey to sort of dormant followers like sort of the larger folks are. So I think that's sort of one within the creator economy. I think the second trend that I'm seeing that I'm more, to be honest, passionate about, and I think this is where Goldhouse plays, is the new community economy. The community economy is the new creator economy, and it's actually quite different. It's just to go through the trinity of fame, fortune, creativity that guide all the creative industries. Even within fame, communities are focused on credentialed expertise with highly engaged subsets of groups. They don't care about large, voluminous audiences as much, right? Second, in terms of fortune, because there's been more sort of monetization opportunities on large platforms, you can now within communities make more money from fewer places as opposed to many pennies in many places in the creator economy. And then third is on creativity. You have to unfortunately have a defendable skill set now. I think back to 2010 to 2018 and the wonderful legion that are vloggers, and many of them did translate very well and successfully and continue to this day, but most did not, because the reality is the skill set required to be a strong vlogger is a pulse, and that's just not enough. So anyway, so I think those are a couple of the themes. How did we get here? We can talk all day long, but it's diversified revenue that's not CPM view based. So you don't actually have to be famous anymore. I see a lot of the rise of the niche platforms, whether it's by category in the case of Twitch and gaming, or Spotify in the case of music. These are obviously very large niches, or even platforms by demographic. You have like the Asian Boss Girls or the Next Sharks in the API community. A lot of that has sort of perpetuated the shift from just adoring individual idols in the creator economy to empowering multiple micro communities that are now authorities within the community economy.
What platforms excite you the most right now? Are there any that you're just keeping your eye on?
Oh, God. I am excited for the platform that is going to automate the process of deploying and maintaining DAOs. It does not exist yet, at least doesn't exist in the way it should. I'm excited about sorry, this is going to be a non-answer. I'm excited about the platforms that can engineer the new sort of creative franchises, whether it's because they use AI to indicate to the producer what sort of categories, script, artistry, and so forth will take off the fastest. I'm excited by this. Also does not exist yet, the sort of what I call the meta subscription. So subscriptions are so one-dimensional now. It's like you pay and you get one thing, and that's just like not enough. But whoever can really bundle, almost think of like a walking into Disney World and like bundle that 5 cents experience, I think is really compelling. I have a really annoying like 6-point alliterative thesis on that. But that does not exist right now. The closest things are like the Patreons and the Discords of the world, but like those monetization outlets, I think are still evolving. I'll put it that way. So I'm excited about all those. Yeah, and then I think finally is like I'm really excited about sort of people power. Obviously, great platforms do not make great companies, great people do. And so how can we think about the next generation of talent, where in all forms, right, whether it's corporate or creative? Sorry to advertising where you are corporate and creative, but yeah, where are they coming from? How are we sort of honing their skills? How are we ensuring they're rising and all that?
I'm Janine Poggi. I'm here with Bing Chen. Thank you to those who are watching at home. Haida Rajendra from India, Cindy from Canada, Tom from California, Umar, Mark, and Seema. Hi, thank you for watching and thank you for tuning in. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in our social channels and we'll bring them into the conversation. You know, we're talking and using interchangeably here the words influencer and creator. And I'm curious your feelings on the genesis of the influencer becoming the creator. Are they interchangeable? And does creator take on a new role today?
Yeah, so I popularized creator within the end of 2010, early 2011, because it used to actually be partner. So there's a thing called the YouTube Partner Program. It's basically a pretty basic, like ad-based walled garden application-based program at YouTube. And I remember thinking partner is so corporate and not endemic to who we were just stylistically. We were all like 22, 23. The second was they also were already calling themselves creators. So this is one of those marketing 101 lessons of speak to people the way they're already speaking to themselves. And so we evangelized creator round. The only pushback, honestly, we got, I won't say who it was because he's quite a whale in marketing, but I got some pushback from someone who thought it was like too religiously loaded because we capitalized it. But nonetheless, like 23-year-old being one out. And in tandem with that, our advertising team saw very quickly, specifically, I remember Stephanie Wendelin, who I think is still at YouTube, who helped engineer one of the first two sort of influencer marketing deals. She and others were starting to think about these as influencers. Punchline is influencers hate being called influencers. It's fine for industry jargons. We need to know what we're talking about. But implicitly, when you say influencer, someone just exists to be exploited or leveraged, which is not what most of these people are. They think of themselves as creative entities first. And so I think that's number one. That's why I always sort of default to creator. It also is nicely alliterative with my theory on transitioning to community economy. So self-interestingly, I just use that instead.
So, in terms of thinking about the future of what all this looks like and where we go from here, how should brands be thinking about evolving their influencer strategy at this point to be ahead of where influencers, or I guess creators, are going next?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. So number one is thinking about creators as true creative partners on an ongoing basis is the single most important thing to do. And I know this is often priced and or operationally prohibitive, but the more that we can get in that mental cadence, the more that we can structure our partner program so it's in it for the long haul, the better. Now, how does one actually structure this so that it's interesting? What are sort of creators incentivized by? Of course, that always depends on like the platform, the company, and so forth. But generally, creators care about one of six things. These are, by the way, not too dissimilar from what super fans and fans care about, which is probably an indication that consumers are creators, creators are consumers as well. Punchline, by the way, if you look at most platforms, the most active consumers are creators themselves, and the most prolific consumers are also the most prolific creators are also the most consumptive. And so I do think it benefits us for a variety of reasons to think this way. So there are six. So number one is creators typically just want closer access to the IP, the platform, and so forth that they love. Second is they also just want cash. Now, there's like all this sort of discussion, especially in the startup world, do we pay to play early on? The universal answer to that is creators should always get paid for their talent, but you, and especially in the startup world, are not in a position to pay them what they are worth in the early days. And so instead of sort of cash, I would think more to sort of the old marketing adage of the best product is the best marketing, where if you have a great product that someone actually wants to use, they will. Now, once you do, and once you are in a position that's liquid enough to pay, there's all sorts of stratified cash structures, whether it's upfronts, whether it's bonuses or otherwise. The third is content. So wanting to be able to produce more prolific, high quality content, but also being able to retrieve content in special ways would be number three. The fourth is experiences that money can't buy. Self-explanatory. Do you get invited to like the fancy blah, blah, blah thing? Fifth is status. And so especially for fans, they don't want to be seen as submissive or sort of, submissive like to something else, right? Increasingly, people not only want agency, but they just have an aversion to anything that is idolized, particularly because of the sort of remnants of traditional institutional aversion. And so being able to give badging, status, rights, and so forth is also important. And then the final of the six is, of course, just surprise. So if something is consistently expected, it becomes, sort of very boring, as it were. And so making sure we can sort of engage there is also important. The other thing I think about with brands, and this is partly endemic to like how you think about them as a creative partner, is also thinking about sort of rituals. And so my model for all things in culture is the church. And the church is without question by followers and revenue the most powerful institution in the world. And I say, of course, church broadly, and you can pick your faith, as it were. One of the best lessons from the church that I think brands can use when they're engaging with creators is to think, okay, if I instinctively know I go to church on Sundays, or I go to temple a certain day, or I go to Shabbat dinner on Friday nights. Like, how can we engineer those regular recurring things so that another can expect it? The second best part about these rituals is the wrapping is consistent, but the interior is always distinct to maintain novelty. So even if you go to church on Sunday, you know that there's going to be a sermon, you know you're going to sing, there's probably a barbecue after, but every element is going to be different because it's a different sermon. You might not have your good salty casserole during the barbecue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think about those sorts of things of, okay, as a brand, how can I put creators in that wrapping where on the first day, last day of every month, we have some sort of consistency. We then maybe gestalt those every quarter or season, partly because like this is the way companies operate, but also partly because that's how like every human thinks in threes. And then outside of that, how do we sort of refresh annually as well? So I think those are three, I don't know, potentially all over the place, but three ideas at least that are hopefully helpful.
Of course, I think everyone is planning for and testing out various ways that they can approach Web3 and the metaverse. What do you think the role of the influencer will take in the metaverse?
I think the first question we have to ask ourselves is like what life we really want to live. And the punchline here is like we all saw the
I
Get
love
Rich
how
Quick.
all of your questions get very philosophical from the get-go. I love it.
It's like, I mean, I'll bring myself into this. Like, I remember when AMC stock and GameStop stock were,
Yeah.
nothing. And I have several friends who made $20 million literally within a week. And I look at that and I absolutely have FOMO because I have things I want to buy my mother, that maybe she doesn't need, maybe I don't need. I look at my friends who launched NFT lines, who also are worth multiple 8 figures on that alone. And yeah, I have a little bit of FOMO, but I think it has to start out with like, are you trying to get rich quick? Or do you care about longevity, which is the true test of quality? And I think that the reason I didn't partake in either is like, I just unfortunately blindly just care about quality and longevity. And so I do think that's like number one where we have to start, especially as influencers, because any influencer can launch a line right now, less so than it was the case early this year for all the reasons we know, but anyone can launch something and become successful. And so I would say influencers are going to play a couple roles. Number one is there's still no decided and broad sweeping functional utility to NFTs. And by the way, I'm going to focus down my Web3 question just because it's such a broad space. And I'll specifically focus on NFTs and DAOs. There still isn't. Most of the people who are in the creative industries who are promising all these things are not A, creatively equipped to deliver on the promise that they made. B, is even if they deliver, dare I say, creativity is not defendable at some point, as unpopular as that is. And that's just because it's commoditized because there's just so much great creative out there. And so I would look to creators and the types of businesses that they've interactively built on the YouTubes, the Twitches, the Discords of the world, and see what are actual utilities that they can provide that can then translate over to NFTs. If you're a fitness trainer, for instance, on YouTube named Blogilates, can you actually translate that into an NFT-driven token pass for a different form of a monthly subscription to a set of workouts, right? This is a very easy sort of analogous thing. And as I alluded to, the 6 sort of items earlier of access, cash, content, experiences, status, and surprise, I think a lot of those can be translated to the parameters that can inform what utilities exist within NFTs. The second is I think the community economy is absolutely going to define DAOs. Goldhouse hilariously is actually built as a DAO without knowing it. We have sort of self-regenerative profits. 100% of my fund profits go back to the nonprofit, like all that, like we vote by committee, all this stuff. And so I think there's a second area where they're going to inform. The third is fringe culture, of course, has always defined mainstream culture at some point. When you look at the sort of traditional creative industries, the most lucrative creative franchises in descending order are, of course, Pokemon, Marvel, Harry Potter, and Star Wars. These were incredibly niche and nerdy, depending on like who you were. And so I think about sort of creators by definition as being fringe because they're not always stuck in traditional mainstream systems and therefore not always as stratified as helping to inform new creative sort of categories that we're going to pursue outside of the structures that are NFTs and DAOs.
Bing, this was a great conversation. I can't believe we have run out of time already. Thank you for bringing a little bit of a philosophical guidance to the creator economy. I loved it. Thank you again. And congrats on your AAF honors.
Thank you. Thank you. I still feel like an imposter, but I'm very honored to be here with you, Janine. Thank you so much again.
Be well. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Be sure to check out our upcoming episodes of Remotely. You can find out more at adage.com/remotely. And as always, thank you to our Ad Age crew, Lauren Ciardio, Arabella Breck, and Anna Sakula for helping to make this happen. Thanks, everyone.